There's something unsettling about rain in the wilderness, something ancient and watchful that turns the world cold. If you've ever felt that creeping unease in the woods, you're not alone. Here's why I'll never step foot on a trail again when it rains. In 2012, I was 21 years old, a college student immersed in the world of forestry. It wasn't just a field of study, it was a passion, something deeply rooted in my identity. Nature had always felt like home to me. As a child, I would spend hours wandering through the woods near my house, losing myself in the shadows of towering trees and the whispers of wind weaving through the branches. There was something timeless about the forest, a quiet wisdom that resonated with me in ways nothing else could. Studying forestry wasn't just about preparing for a career. It was about preserving that connection, about understanding the intricate web of life that thrived beyond the reach of asphalt roads and concrete walls. I had always believed that the forest held secrets, that each tree, each blade of grass, was part of a grand story written over centuries. So, when my professor suggested an opportunity for extra credit, a hiking trip to reconnect with the wilderness, I didn't hesitate. A chance to remind ourselves why we chose this field, he said, his tone warm and encouraging. For me, it wasn't just a suggestion, it was an invitation to escape, to trade the buzz of fluorescent-lit classrooms for the symphony of the wild. There was one person I knew I had to invite, Lily. Lily wasn't like most of the people in our program, where others saw nature as a collection of data points, soil acidity, tree height, biodiversity indices. Lily saw something more. She had this quiet way of looking at the world, as if she could see the stories hidden in the smallest details, the veins of a leaf, the twist of a vine, the subtle shift in the wind. We weren't exactly close, but we had a mutual understanding, an unspoken bond that came from seeing the world in similar ways. Lily was the kind of person who didn't need to say much to make her presence felt. Her long, dark hair framed a face that was both serene and thoughtful, her green eyes always observing, always curious. One afternoon, after class, I approached her with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. "Hey Lily," I began, adjusting the strap of my backpack. "I'm planning to head to the preserve over break for the extra credit. Want to join me? It's a quiet spot, perfect for hiking." She looked at me for a moment, her head tilting slightly as she considered my words. Then she smiled, a small, genuine smile that made me feel like I'd already won. "Sure," she said simply. "Just tell me when." That was Lily for you. Straightforward, no fuss. Over the next few days, we threw ourselves into preparation. We spent hours in outdoor supply stores, comparing everything from hiking boots to portable stoves. Lily had a knack for practicality, often pointing out things I wouldn't have thought of. "What if it rains?" she asked at one point, holding up a waterproof liner for our packs. "We'll need these." By the time we loaded up my car, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. The preserve we were heading to was a few hours away, a sprawling expanse of trails, dense woods, and secluded clearings. It was the kind of place where you could walk for miles without seeing another soul. A place where the forest truly felt alive. We hit the road early, the morning sun casting long shadows across the highway. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She didn't speak much, but her presence was calming, a steady anchor as we left the familiar behind. We reached the preserve by mid-afternoon. The parking lot was busier than I'd hoped, filled with families unloading picnic baskets and couples taking selfies at the trailhead. Lily raised an eyebrow at me, her lips curving into a playful smirk. "This is your idea of quiet?" "Just wait," I said, laughing. Most of these people won't go far. Once we're a few miles in, it'll just be us and the trees." At the trailhead, a park ranger stood by the entrance, leaning casually against a wooden post. He was middle-aged, his face weathered and tan, with a friendly demeanor that put me at ease. "You two heading in?" he asked as we approached. "Yeah," I replied, nodding. "That okay?" "Of course. Just sign in here," he said, handing me a clipboard, "and take one of these." He passed me a small card with the station's contact information. "If you need anything, call us. There are a couple of shacks deeper in. Good for shelter if the weather turns. Just make sure you clean up after yourselves." I thanked him, scribbling our names on the sheet. Lily offered him a polite nod, and he returned it with a smile. "Stay safe out there," he said as we stepped onto the trail. The forest welcomed us with open arms. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the ground as the wind rustled the leaves above. It felt like stepping into another world, one untouched by time. For the first few hours, we walked in companionable silence. Lily occasionally stopped to point out something interesting: a cluster of mushrooms growing on a fallen log, the intricate pattern of bark on an ancient tree. Her observations reminded me of why I loved this so much. The forest wasn't just a collection of trees, it was a living, breathing entity, full of secrets waiting to be discovered. By late afternoon, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, its golden light casting long shadows across the trail. "We should find a place to set up camp," Lily said, breaking the silence. I nodded, scanning the path ahead. Not far from where we stood, a small clearing opened up, its grass trampled flat by previous campers. It was perfect. We set up our tents in the clearing, the process quick and efficient after years of practice. By the time the sun sank below the horizon, we had a small fire crackling between us, its warmth a welcome relief from the cooling air. As we sat by the fire, eating granola bars and watching the flames dance, the forest seemed to close in around us. The shadows stretched farther, their edges blurring into the darkness beyond. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. That's when I saw it. Just beyond Lily, at the edge of the clearing, something moved. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the flickering fire. But as I focused, I realized it wasn't a shadow. It was a shape, small and dark, barely distinguishable from the underbrush. "Everything okay?" Lily asked, noticing my distracted gaze. "Yeah," I said quickly, forcing myself to look away. "Just thought I saw something, probably an animal." She glanced over her shoulder, her gaze scanning the trees. "If it was, it's gone now," she said with a shrug, turning back to the fire. I nodded, trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. It was probably nothing, a rabbit, or maybe a bird, but something about it didn't feel right. That night, as I lay in my tent, I couldn't sleep. The forest, usually so full of sound, was unnervingly silent. No crickets, no owls, just an oppressive stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. Every rustle of leaves outside my tent set my nerves on edge. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the clearing. My heart pounded as I held my breath, straining to hear more. But when I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, there was nothing there, only the faint glow of our dying fire. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight pierced through my tent, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I emerged to find Lily already awake, sitting by the remains of the fire. "Sleep okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I kept hearing something," she admitted. "Like scratching, or maybe..." I don't know. Something brushing against my tent. Probably just the wind, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Or an animal. Lily didn't look convinced, but she let it go. As we packed up our gear and prepared to continue our hike, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. If you've ever felt the woods hiding secrets, hit like and share this video to spread the story. By the time the rain started, the forest had already begun to change. It wasn't something I could pinpoint at first. A subtle shift in the air, a slight dimming of the light filtering through the trees. The cheerful vibrancy of the morning seemed to have been replaced by a hushed, almost reverent stillness. Even the birdsong, which had accompanied us as we packed up camp, had faded into silence, leaving only the sound of our footsteps on the damp earth. At first, the rain was gentle, more of a mist than a downpour. It clung to the leaves and turned the forest floor into a patchwork of glistening green and brown. But as we walked, the rain began to intensify. The drops grew heavier, colder, soaking through our clothes and pooling in the creases of our gear. The trail, which had been firm and easy to follow, was quickly turning into a muddy quagmire, each step a struggle as our boots sank into the ground. I don't remember seeing rain in the forecast, Lily said, glancing up at the sky. Her hood was pulled low over her face, but even through the shadows, I could see the tension in her expression. Neither do I admitted, shifting the weight of my pack. The straps dug into my shoulders, made heavier by the damp air. We should probably look for a place to stop soon. If it gets any worse, it's going to be hard to keep moving. The deeper we ventured into the forest, the more it seemed to transform around us. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, and their branches more intertwined, forming a dense canopy that blocked out much of the light. What little sunlight managed to penetrate the clouds and the leaves above was weak and gray, casting the world in a dim, otherworldly glow. The trail narrowed, winding between massive roots and patches of underbrush that seemed almost deliberately placed to slow us down. The mud grew thicker, clinging to our boots and making each step an effort. Even the air felt different, cooler, heavier, and laced with the faint, metallic tang of rain-soaked soil. I feel like we're being watched, Lily said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. I glanced at her, surprised. What do you mean? She shrugged, her eyes scanning the forest around us. I don't know. It's probably just the weather, but something about this place feels off, like we're not supposed to be here. I wanted to dismiss her comment, to chalk it up to the rain and the gloom, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. There was something about the forest that felt wrong. It wasn't just the silence or the way the trees seemed to loom over us. It was the sense that we weren't alone. We continued walking, the rain growing heavier with each passing minute. The sound of the droplets hitting the leaves above created a constant hum, a white noise that seemed to dull my senses. Every so often I thought I heard something else, a rustling in the underbrush, the faint crack of a twig. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. After what felt like hours, we came to a fork in the trail. The main path continued straight ahead, its muddy surface barely visible in the dim light. To our right, a smaller trail branched off, its entrance partially obscured by a cluster of ferns and undergrowth. What do you think? I asked, nodding toward the side trail. Lily hesitated, her gaze lingering on the narrow path. It doesn't look like it gets much use, she said, but maybe it leads to something, a clearing or shelter. I nodded, and we turned onto the smaller trail. The mud here was even thicker, the ground churned up by the rain and littered with fallen branches. The trail wound through a denser section of forest, the trees so close together that their branches seemed to form a solid wall of green. The air was colder here, the wind slicing through the gaps in the trees and carrying with it the faint scent of something metallic and sharp. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was strange. Another thing about this place that didn't feel quite right. We hadn't been on the side trail for long when we saw it. A cabin, its weathered wood darkened by the rain. It sat at the end of the trail, partially hidden by a thicket of trees. At first glance, it looked abandoned, its roof sagging under the weight of years, its windows streaked with dirt and condensation. "This'll do," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The sight of the cabin should have been a relief, but instead, it filled me with unease. There was something about it that felt wrong. Lily didn't respond. She was already making her way toward the cabin, her boots squelching in the mud with each step. I followed, my eyes darting around the clearing. The rain seemed quieter here, its sound muffled, as if the cabin existed in a bubble of silence. The door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a single room lit only by the dim light filtering through a small, fogged-up window. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying the faint scent of mildew and wood rot. The cabin was sparsely furnished. A rickety table and two mismatched chairs stood in one corner, and a small wood-burning stove occupied the other. The walls were lined with shelves, most of them empty except for a few dusty jars and a rusted lantern. "It's not much," Lily said, setting her pack down by the door, "but it's better than staying out in the rain." I nodded, though my attention was drawn to the window. The rain was still falling steadily outside, and the glass was streaked with water, making it difficult to see clearly. But as I stared, something caught my eye. A dark shape, barely visible through the distortion of the glass. At first, I thought it was a branch, half buried in the mud and sticking up at an odd angle. But as the rain washed away the dirt, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a branch. It was an arm. "Lily," I said, my voice low and tense. She looked up from her pack, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" "There's something outside," I said, my eyes fixed on the window. She joined me, peering through the glass. Her breath fogged up the window, and she wiped it away with her sleeve for a better look. "That's not possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The arm was thin and pale, the skin smooth and unblemished. The fingers were splayed, reaching upward as if grasping for something or someone. "Is it moving?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "No," I said, "but it wasn't there a minute ago." The rain continued to wash away the mud, revealing more of the arm. It was eerily still, its unnatural position making my stomach churn. "We need to call the rangers," Lily said, her voice steadier now. She pulled out the card the ranger had given us and quickly dialed the number. The connection crackled with static, but Lily managed to get through. She described what we'd seen, her words calm and precise despite the situation. The ranger on the other end sounded concerned, but not alarmed. "They said they'll send someone out," Lily said as she hung up, "but it might take a while. The storm's making the roads difficult." I nodded, though my eyes remained fixed on the window. The arm hadn't moved, but the rain was revealing more of it. I could see the wrist now, thin and fragile looking, as if it belonged to something not quite human. What would you do in this situation? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. The silence in the cabin felt alive, pressing against us like an invisible weight. It wasn't the comforting silence of nature, where the gentle hum of insects and the rustling of leaves filled the air. No, this was something entirely different, heavy, oppressive, as though the very forest had been muted. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, but it no longer felt like the source of the sound. The rain was simply there, a constant drumbeat that underscored the true weight of the moment. "It stopped knocking," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "For now," I replied, though the words felt hollow. We sat in the dim light of the cabin, the flickering glow of our lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. The small space, which had felt cramped but safe only hours earlier, now felt like a fragile bubble that could burst at any moment. Every creak of the old wooden structure, every groan of the wind outside, sent a fresh wave of unease coursing through me. Lily pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms tightly around them. "What do you think it wants?" I hesitated, my mouth dry. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I don't think it's going to leave until it gets it." Her eyes widened, the flickering lantern light reflecting her fear. "Gets what?" I didn't have an answer, and the weight of that uncertainty felt heavier than anything else. The rain continued to hammer against the cabin, its steady rhythm almost hypnotic. But beneath that sound, there was something else, something subtle but unmistakable. It started as a faint hum, barely perceptible over the noise of the storm. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but as I strained to listen, I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from beneath us. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lily looked at me, her expression tense. "Hear what?" "Listen," I said, motioning for her to stay quiet. We sat in silence, the hum growing louder. It was low and deep, almost like a vibration, and it seemed to resonate through the floorboards. "What is that?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. I shook my head, unable to find the words to answer. The sound wasn't the only thing that felt off. The air inside the cabin had grown colder, the temperature dropping steadily, as though the storm outside had found its way in. My breath puffed out in small, visible clouds, and I saw Lily shiver, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's getting colder," she said, her teeth chattering slightly. "I know," I replied. "It doesn't make sense." The oppressive silence inside the cabin was suddenly broken by a sound outside, a faint rustling, almost like footsteps on wet leaves. Lily and I froze, our eyes meeting in silent terror. "It's out there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The rustling grew louder, moving closer to the cabin. I felt every muscle in my body tense as I turned toward the window. Through the fogged and rain-streaked glass, I could see only darkness, but the sound continued, circling the cabin like a predator stalking its prey. "What do we do?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "We wait," I said, though the word felt like a death sentence. For what felt like an eternity, we sat in silence, listening to the sounds outside. The footsteps, if that's what they were, moved slowly, deliberately, pausing every few moments as if the thing out there was deciding its next move. Then, without warning, something appeared at the window. It was a face, pale and expressionless, with dark, empty eyes that seemed to stare straight through the glass. Its features were indistinct, almost blurred, as though it wasn't entirely solid. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle the sound. I felt my blood run cold as I stared at the face, unable to look away. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared. "What is that?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. The face lingered for a moment longer, then disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The rain continued to streak the glass, washing away any trace of its presence, but the image was burned into my mind. Just as the face vanished, a new sound filled the cabin, a faint scratching coming from beneath the floor. Lily stiffened, her eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" I didn't answer. The scratching was faint at first, almost hesitant, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. "It's under us," I said finally, my voice trembling. "How is that possible?" Lily asked, her tone edged with panic. "There's no basement. There's no crawl space." "I don't know," I admitted, my words tasting bitter in my mouth. The scratching moved, shifting from one side of the room to the other. I could feel it now, a vibration that traveled up through the floorboards and into my legs. It felt like the cabin itself was alive, groaning and shuddering under the strain of something unseen. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep guttural groan that seemed to reverberate through the walls. The sound was low and primal, filled with a weight that made my chest tighten. Lily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Max." Before I could respond, the center of the room erupted. The floorboards splintered, shards of wood flying in all directions as something dark and massive surged upward. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of shadow and motion that defied comprehension. Lily screamed, stumbling backward and nearly falling. I shielded my face with my arms, the force of the explosion knocking me off balance. When I dared to look, I saw it, a long, spindly limb, impossibly thin, yet terrifyingly strong, writhing and twisting as it reached upward. It didn't seem to have a solid form, its surface shifting and undulating like liquid shadow. "We have to go," I shouted, grabbing Lily's hand. We bolted for the door, stumbling over the broken floorboards and scattered debris. The limb lashed out, striking the wall with a force that sent splinters flying. The rain hit us like a wall as we burst outside, the cold water soaking us instantly. The forest was alive with movement, the shadows between the trees shifting and twisting in ways that made my head spin. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Lily down the trail. The mud was thick and heavy, clinging to our boots and making every step a struggle. Behind us, the sound of splintering wood and thudding footsteps grew louder, the thing from the cabin pursuing us with terrifying speed. "Don't look back," I yelled, though the urge to do so was almost unbearable. As we ran, the ground beneath us seemed to come alive. Pale, skeletal hands emerged from the mud, their fingers clawing at the air. "They're everywhere," Lily screamed, her voice filled with panic. One of the hands grabbed my ankle, its grip cold and unrelenting. I stumbled, falling face first into the mud. "Max!" Lily cried, turning back to help me. I kicked at the hand with all my strength, the mud making it slippery. Finally, the grip loosened, and I scrambled to my feet. "We have to keep moving," I said, grabbing Lily's arm and pulling her forward. The hands continued to reach for us, their movements slow but deliberate. Each one seemed to emerge from the ground, fully formed, as though they'd always been there, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it, a faint light cutting through the darkness. It was coming from the trailhead, where the ranger's vehicle was parked. "There!" I shouted, pointing toward it. The light grew brighter as we ran, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. When we finally reached the vehicle, we collapsed against it, gasping for air. The ranger stepped out, his expression grim. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. "Something's out there," I said, my voice shaking. "Something not human." The ranger's face darkened and he nodded. "Get in. We'll talk later." What would you do if you were faced with something like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives for more stories that will leave you questioning what's waiting in the dark.